Hi, thanks so much for coming by. I don't get all that many visitors because not too many people even know I was here in the first place. I'm Sarah Twining Curtis, and this is my stone right here. I died as a fairly young woman, and I was the second wife of Dr. Walter Curtis. Now, Walter was a lovely man. He was the town doctor. He had a prior wife right here. And you will notice that her back is turned to me. I'm not sure what the meaning of that is, but her name was also Sarah, and I think he must have been just very lazy. Didn't even bother to learn a new name. He just goes out and finds another Sarah. But he wasn't married to either of us very long. This young gal died when she was about 28, and I was married to him about 9.5 years before I passed away. Neither of us had children with Dr. Curtis. All of his children were with his third wife. My bridesmaid, one Maggie Coit, a flirtatious and, I think, pretentious woman. And you will see that they're not buried here because Maggie thought this was too low-brow a cemetery to be married in. So she's buried with him up in Wilmington, which was a little bit more high class. But for me, Southport is the perfect place. Of course, when I was here, we called it Smithville, and Walter hated it. He said nobody would stop and go visit Smithville. They need a town with more appeal, a name that reaches you. Southport. And he was a great advocate for bringing on the name of Southport. He was the town mayor, he was the clerk of court, and he was the town physician. So he had considerable sway over public opinion, and he wanted it to be Southport. He also wanted to bring in the railroad, and he lived long enough to see Southport come about as the town changed, but the railroad didn't come until 2 years after he died. But because he was such an influential character, we know a lot about him. He's from New Hampshire, and when he was about 16, he started at Dartmouth. And he's going through his education, and his daddy gets in touch with him, and he says, "Son, we got no money. You're going to have to drop out of school." Walter says, "Well, what'll I do?" So he gets in touch with his sister, and he says, "What are you doing to handle this money crisis?" And she said, "Well, I've taken a job as a governess, and so I'm going to North Carolina to be a governess." And Walter said, "Well, I think I'll just come with you and see if I can find work." Well, she shows up at the family that's paying for her, and they're very glad to see her. They're not quite so sure what they're going to do with Walter. He's 16 years old. And he wrote a lovely narrative of their journey down, which brings to life some of the things that maybe you don't think about all that often. He says as they came down, they came by train. They had to carry gold with them because they could not use the same currency state to state to state. So they had to have gold for each state's currency. They couldn't even buy a through ticket. He had to buy a ticket as he entered each state. They had to get off the train, go buy a ticket, and then when they entered to the next state, then they bought another ticket. So they came very slow route down here. They get here. Family's not all that thrilled to see him, so he takes a job with a neighbor family. And he becomes a school teacher. They pay him about $20 a month. And when he finishes the summer, he says, "I'm a rich man." He's made $60 to $80. And he's ready to go back up to New Hampshire to finish his education. So he gets on the train to go back, and he says, "Well, I got enough money to buy food in a restaurant, so I'm going to get off the train." And he said, "I'll get off in Washington. I've never been to the Capitol." He said, "I'd love to see the Capitol." So he gets off and he's walking around, and there's this gigantic White House. "I've been dying to see the inside. Wonder what they've done with it." So he goes up and he knocks on the door. He says, "I'd like to visit with President Polk." Well, Polk is from North Carolina, and he says, "Come on in." And here's this 16, 17-year-old kid, walks in the door, sits down with the President of the United States, and has a chat about what's going on and what the President thinks, wants to hear from him. What do you think's going on in North Carolina? What's happening? How are the things changing? And he's listening to this young kid. They finish their conversation, and Walter stands up. He says, "You know, I'd like to see what you've done with the place." Takes a tour. He walks all through the White House on a tour. Can you even imagine that in our current life? It's amazing. At any rate, it shows you who he is. This is a guy of tremendous enterprise and innovation and a willingness to try anything to get where he wants. So he drives on back up he gets back to New Hampshire, and he goes and becomes an intern. And he says the most common medical treatment he witnessed regularly was bloodletting. He said he remembered as a child being asked to let the blood drain out of his arm as he's experiencing a medical condition. And he said, I could tell then it wasn't terribly effective. But he gets his medical education, and he's up there for about 3 years, and he comes back, and he comes to Southport and buys a medical practice. So we're looking at a young 22-year-old buys a medical practice, and he finds out very quickly there are two features which really shape Southport: weather and disease. And he says we have to respond to disease because it's killing people in huge numbers. Influenza, smallpox, and yellow fever. And a lot of it's coming in on the ships. So he says the thing we need to do is to stop the ship traffic before it gets to Wilmington and get rid of the people who have the disease so they don't give it to the public. So he designs quarantine protocols, and he says, ideally, I would have a station, a quarantine station. So he comes up with a plan. Now, if you've ever ridden the ferry, you've seen the big concrete block out in the middle of the river.
That's what I'm thinking of. Okay.
That's exactly what it was. That is the base of the quarantine station. And he had laundry out there. He had a hospital, a little chapel, had a restaurant, so he could feed everybody. Well, he finishes the project, he's ready to move in, and the federal government, which paid for part of the funding, says, we don't want you to run it. We've brought in our own person. And Walter was not given the job, and it wounded him deeply. He had been a mayor of Southport, he was on the city council, he was clerk of court. He played the organ at the church. He thought he was a solid as citizen as could be, and here his life project thumbs their nose at him and puts somebody else in charge that doesn't know Southport, doesn't know the history of the communicable disease, and he is devastated by that, and it haunted him the rest of his life. But that doesn't mean he died without accomplishment, because he brought the quarantine station. He was also the moving force behind changing the name from Smithville to Southport. He says, nobody's going to get off the boat to visit Smithville, but they will get off to visit a town of Southport. That has charm, that has allure. He also felt bringing a train station down, if the train line came all the way to from Wilmington down here, that it could improve the commercial opportunities for our businesses. So people got very excited about it, and Walter drove both of those projects. He lived long enough to see the town name change, but he died before the railroad was completed. He died about 2 years ahead of it, and when it was dedicated, they didn't even mention him in passing. And he was very, very sad about that. But Walter was the interesting person. I'm kind of an afterthought. I'm a happy afterthought, but an afterthought all the same.
Thank you.